Good afternoon, everyone. As Marv indicated, I am the Deputy Director of ICE, and I want to thank you for the warm welcome and for the opportunity to participate in this important event. I applaud the Partnership for Safe Medicines for its efforts in safeguarding the public from the dangers of counterfeit and unsafe medications. The work all of you do, especially in raising consumer awareness about the existence and dangers of counterfeit, substandard, and unsafe medicines goes a long way in protecting the public's health. I can tell you that at ICE, the second largest investigative agency in the nation, we are targeting counterfeit prescription drug criminal activity in an intensive way. And I'm going to be discussing how we strengthen our domestic and international partnerships to reach beyond our borders and conduct operations and investigations of criminals involved in the trafficking of counterfeit prescription drugs. But first, I'd like to mention someone that I consider to be a hero. Francis Oldham Kelsey was a pharmacologist, a medical doctor, and an inspector for the Food and Drug Administration during the 1950s and 60s. And Dr. Kelsey was the government official responsible for refusing to approve the marketing of the drug, thalidomide? By blocking the sale of that drug, designed to treat pregnant women for morning sickness and until further study, Dr. Kelsey saved countless children in the United States from being born with deformities. However, many countries abroad did not ban this particular drug, and tragically, 10,000 children from 48 other countries whose mothers took thalidomide while expecting were born with severe limb and organ defects. And although the significance of the incident may not be lost on anyone in the medical field or the pharmaceutical industry, I mention it because Dr. Kelsey, I mean, for me, for all of us, is an inspirational example of how an American did what was right for the people that she had a duty to protect. But we don't need to go back to the annals of history to find individuals who are passionately committed to protecting public health. Many men and women today are dedicated to the same cause. Representatives from the federal government, the academic community, and our industry and private sector partners are fighting and working together like never before to protect the public from the scourge of counterfeit prescription drugs. Those of us immersed in this fight know that counterfeit prescription drugs are unauthorized drugs that are manufactured, labeled, packaged, and distributed as if they were the authentic approved prescription drug, the real thing. We understand how these counterfeit drugs deceive consumers, undermine public trust of the pharmaceutical industry, and pose a major risk to public health. Patients unknowingly take these counterfeit drugs, and they look identical to the genuine drug, and they're being duped. They are purchasing and ingesting drugs that are ineffective at best and fatal at worst. Counterfeit prescription drugs often contain no active ingredient, an insufficient amount of active ingredient, or sometimes the wrong active ingredient. Worse yet, authorities have discovered counterfeit pills made in China that were filled with toxic substances, such as road paint or other hazardous materials. A counterfeit drug could be a matter of life or death for a cancer patient or anyone taking a life-saving or life-sustaining medication. And I'm not speaking hypothetically. Examples of the dangers related to counterfeit drugs abound. Last year, counterfeit anti-anxiety drugs, anti-anxiolytics. And by the way, I in a previous life, used to work for Pfizer as a pharmaceutical representative. So it's a particular area that has intrigued me when I became an investigator and continue to pursue this threat as it has evolved and expanded over the years. But last year, these anti-anxiolytics were sold to U.S. consumers over the internet. They were found to contain pentobarbital, a drug that's typically used for sedation before administering lethal injections. 2 cancer drugs trademarked by a U.S. company and illegally manufactured in China and Indonesia were devoid of the critical active ingredient for treatment of cancer. Counterfeits of the U.S. company's vaccine for pneumococcal bacteria distributed in El Salvador were found to be missing the essential ingredient, providing families with a false sense of disease protection. A vast quantity and a wide array of illegal prescription drugs that are primarily sold via the internet are circulating within the global market and are destined for worldwide consumption. In fact, another added dimension to the counterfeit prescription drug problem is the high demand for legitimate prescription drugs. The public is clamoring for medicines that treat chronic illnesses, relieve pain, and improve the quality of or extend life. The Centers for Disease Control estimates that 47% of people in the United States, almost half the population, took a prescription drug during the past month. That's roughly 143 million people who took a doctor-prescribed medication to treat an illness or a condition such as cancer, a heart ailment, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, an endocrine problem, or mental disorder, or diabetes. Protecting the public from prescription drugs that have been tainted or adulterated and illicitly passed through the global supply chain is an enormous challenge. The most effective strategy in protecting the integrity of prescription drugs is for everyone to be engaged in securing our citizens from the threat of illegal drugs, regardless of whether they are involved in the manufacturing, distribution, warehousing, selling of drugs, or the civil and criminal enforcement of companies and individuals that profit from dangerous counterfeiting. Each of us represented here today plays a critical role. By attacking the threat of counterfeit prescription drugs from every conceivable angle, supply chain security measures, criminal enforcement, government regulations, and academic study, we are creating a synergistic effect to protect those who rely on prescription medications for their health and well-being. Now let me share with you a little bit about ICE. We are well posed, both domestically and internationally, to investigate counterfeit prescription drug offenses. We're charged with a wide berth of responsibilities to protect the nation's borders, land, air, and sea, from illegal entry of people, money, and materials. While the men and women of our Enforcement and Removal Operations Directorate, or ERO, are charged with enforcing our civil immigration laws, our Homeland Security Investigations Directorate, or HSI, serves as the primary investigative arm of the department. And we have more than 7,000 special agents that are assigned to 200 offices throughout the country, and they're assigned to 70 offices around the world. In addition to intellectual property enforcement, they investigate crimes such as terrorism, narcotics and weapons trafficking, money laundering, child exploitation, human smuggling, and trafficking. HSI is a leading voice in the international customs enforcement community. Our HSI special agents are recognized internationally for their expertise in enforcing customs and other criminal laws. Our attachés abroad forge bonds with our global counterparts and strengthen our capacity to conduct successful domestic, international, and multilateral operations. As we like to say, we build these networks, we build these international networks to counter transnational criminal networks. And through our network of international attachés, we maintain offices in 10 of the 12 countries listed as priority watch list countries in the U.S. Trade Representative's Special 301 report. On the home front, in fact, right across the Potomac in Crystal City, Virginia, HSI is leading a team of experts from 19 federal agencies at the National Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center, or the IPR Center. The IPR Center is becoming a central fusion point for industry, government, and academia. But this facility is much more than just a think tank. The IPR Center is also a place where federal agents and other government experts share information, they develop interdiction initiatives, and both conduct and coordinate national and international intellectual property theft investigations. This is a powerful tool in our arsenal. The ability to hold the worst offenders accountable for their actions by arresting them, seizing their criminally obtained assets, and prosecuting them in the U.S. court of law whenever possible. Counterfeit prescription drugs are just one aspect of the wide scope of IP crime that the IPR Center combats. And unfortunately, there's almost no marketable product that exists today that counterfeiters aren't beyond exploiting. Brand name clothing, shoes and handbags, as well as pirated movies, music, and software are all under siege. Counterfeiters have also applied tainted toothpaste, inferior airplane parts, and substandard electronics used in weapon systems, as well as fake cancer medications. So, of course, we prioritize the counterfeiting of those commodities that particularly impact national security or public safety, as we are here today to talk about. All of these IP crimes negatively impact the nation. They steal jobs, and they rob federal, state, and local governments of billions of dollars in import duties and tax revenue that our country sorely needs to pay its bills and grow the economy. Additionally, the ill-gotten gains from counterfeiting are often diverted to fund other serious transnational crimes. Counterfeit electronics designed for weapon systems jeopardize both national security and the lives of our men and women that are fighting for our country. And of course, we've already established that counterfeit prescription drugs endanger the health and well-being of unsuspecting consumers. In our continuing commitment to fight IP crimes, HSI investigated nearly 2,000 IP cases last year that resulted in 365 arrests, 216 indictments, and 170 convictions. ICE and our closest partner, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, made nearly 20,000 IP seizures, toppling $1.4 billion in manufacturer's suggested retail price in 2010. That's a 34% increase from the previous fiscal year. And we'll soon have our numbers calculated for 2011, but current statistics show that by the end of September, we will have made 574 arrests, which led to 355 indictments and 291 convictions. The administration is also providing unprecedented support to protect intellectual property rights. In 2009, the President appointed the first U.S. Intellectual Property Enforcement Coordinator to coordinate interagency policy among federal agencies engaged in the fight against intellectual property crimes. The IPR Center works closely with the IPEC. And if you haven't already done so, I encourage you to review the IPEC's report, the Counterfeit Pharmaceutical Interagency Working Group document. This publication outlines a series of steps taken to address counterfeiting and diversion. The report also recommends new laws that Congress should pass related to IP offenses, such as increasing the sentencing guidelines for offenses related to counterfeit drug cases. Now, as you can imagine, the FDA, a partner at the IPR Center, is an integral and absolutely essential part of our counterfeit drug investigations. And I want to take a moment to thank the men and the women of FDA and thank them for their commitment to the IPR Center in particular. They have an enormous responsibility in ensuring that Americans are not harmed from a myriad of consumer goods. We take for granted that the food and drugs we ingest and other everyday products that we use are safe. We tend to forget that behind the scenes, the men and women of FDA are working tirelessly to ensure these products are not harmful. We owe the FDA a large measure of gratitude. ICE's role as a U.S. federal criminal enforcer complements and parallels that of the FDA. First of all, we are both charged with protecting the public. And secondly, the forward march of global commerce has increased the complexity in how both ICE and the FDA fulfill our missions. IP theft and counterfeiting are modern-day threats. They are negative byproducts of globalization and the rise of the Internet. And so let's take globalization first. For years, the majority of goods America used were manufactured, processed, and distributed within our own U.S. borders. Overseeing, regulating, and enforcing laws related to the safety of products has always been a weighty responsibility. But I don't think anyone would disagree that safeguarding our goods was a lot simpler when the overwhelming majority of goods we used were homegrown, so to speak. But times have changed. Today, America imports more of the goods we consume than ever before. We rely heavily on foreign producers to supply us with the goods we use. As it pertains to our discussion today, an astounding 80% of the active pharmaceutical ingredients in prescription drugs come from outside of our borders, along with about 40% of the drugs themselves. The FDA reports that a decade ago, 6 million shipments of FDA-regulated goods passed through the nation's 300 ports of entry. This year, the number will quadruple to 24 million shipments. With a shift in global production, U.S. government agencies such as FDA, ICE, and CBP, Customs and Border Protection, are working to ensure the safety of goods manufactured and imported into the United States from every corner of the globe. At ICE, we are extending our law enforcement activities beyond our borders in order to protect supply chains. When we refer to the drug global supply chain, we're talking about an increasingly complex path that medical products travel from raw source materials to finished products and ultimately to consumers. At every stage in this process, opportunities arise for that product to be contaminated, diverted, counterfeited, or otherwise adulterated. Now, I'm not suggesting an isolationist policy regarding commerce. The United States has to participate and it has to be competitive globally. But our aim at ICE is not to impede the legitimate flow of goods, but rather to stop the criminal activity within those illicit global supply chains. So the Internet presents a challenge in enforcing prescription drug laws because thousands of websites openly sell unapproved and counterfeit drugs. It's against the law to sell prescription drugs without requiring a valid prescription. But this is exactly what illegal online pharmacies are doing. United States laws, such as the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and the Controlled Substances Act, are in place for valid reasons. Drugs purchased over the Internet and imported into the United States are not FDA approved, and there's no guarantee that they are safe. They could be contaminated, lead to dangerous side effects, contain the wrong active ingredient, or be packaged in phony but legitimate-looking packaging. When it comes to the illicit business conducted from the Internet, the adage, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem, holds true. The voluntary actions of major Internet companies, such as payment processors, overnight shippers, Internet providers, and domain name registrars, can dramatically reduce online infringement. And I'm happy to report that many members of the private sector are doing the right thing by joining us in the battle against counterfeit prescription drugs. When IPEC approached companies like GoDaddy, Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, PayPal, MasterCard, Visa, and others to help us wage this fight against illegal pharmacies, these companies agreed to try to address the challenge. And in December of last year, 11 market leaders agreed to form a nonprofit organization to combat illegal online pharmacies, criminals masquerading as pharmacies. The new Center for Safe Internet Pharmacies is a private sector, 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting information sharing, education, and more efficient law enforcement of rogue Internet pharmacies. Businesses that belong to this organization agree to share information with law enforcement about unlawful Internet pharmacies and to stop payment, shut down the site, and take other voluntary enforcement action when appropriate. This strategy encourages dialogue among private sector Internet intermediaries and contributes to the dynamic function of the Internet. I commend the CSIP for their demonstrated commitment to reduce online criminal activity. The steps they've taken support our law enforcement efforts and exemplify good corporate business practices. Perhaps the most extenuating factor and ultimate driver of the meteoric rise of counterfeit prescription drugs is the public's demand for prescription drugs, as I've mentioned previously. The pharmaceutical industry faces intense pressure to lower costs and improve production to accommodate the increased demand. Then there's the mindset of the criminal. Those involved in the counterfeit prescription drug trade put personal profit over the health and well-being of the public. As criminal investigators, we see this firsthand. And there's a huge profit to be made in the illicit drug trade. Law enforcement agencies have no control over criminal minds, of course, but when it comes to targeting intellectual property rights offenders, we've researched and studied their ploys and their tactics. We've examined and concentrated our enforcement actions on the links and routes they use to distribute bogus products. Counterfeit prescription drugs that contaminate our global supply chains require an international response and multilateral international investigations. ICE and our IPR Center partners, working with our international partners, have been aggressively targeting those who trade in counterfeit pharmaceutical drugs in a number of different operations. We are bringing the fight against counterfeit drugs to an international level, and that's what we have to do when we talk about a global problem, about a transnational problem. We have to attack that entire supply chain. And we do this by leading and participating in global law enforcement sweeps in conjunction with the World Customs Organization, Interpol, and others. Again, building these international networks to counter these illicit networks. So let me share with you a few recent operations. In 2009, several IPR Center members and 45 WCO members conducted a multi-day surge operation known as Operation Mercury. We targeted mislabeled, counterfeit, and substandard pharmaceuticals at international mail facilities and express hubs. We kept on the same path with Operation Mercury 2 in 2010. IPR Center members and 35 WCO members targeted the importation and distribution of substandard and counterfeit pharmaceuticals. In total, more than 17,000 mail express carrier parcels were determined to contain pharmaceuticals, and we seized more than 1,300 parcels of illicit drugs that covered the landscape: antibiotics, steroids, human growth hormones, heart medications, psychiatric medications, and lifestyle medications. And in 2011, HSI also conducted 12 enforcement surges under Operation Apothecary in conjunction with CBP, the FDA, and the U.S. Postal Inspection Service at international mail facilities and express carrier facilities. Operation Apothecary was geared towards examining vulnerabilities in international mail facilities, express carrier hubs, and land borders, where commercial quantities of illicit drugs might be smuggled. Apothecary surges have resulted in 738 seizures and the examination of more than 7,000 parcels. In addition, the operation has resulted in roughly 22 criminal arrests, 10 indictments, and 10 convictions. We've been also targeting online sales of counterfeit and illegal medicines under 4 separate Operation Pangea surges. These multilateral law enforcement actions have resulted in worldwide arrests and seizures of thousands of potentially harmful drugs. Last month, we concluded Pangea 4, the largest operation of its kind to date. In this 7-day operation, led by Interpol and the Permanent Forum for International Pharmaceutical Crime, the IPR Center, and agencies from 81 countries, along with members of the pharmaceutical industry, working groups, and online payment systems providers, targeted websites that were supplying illegal and dangerous medicines. HSI, CBP, the FDA, and the FBI coordinated the U.S. strategy, which resulted in the seizure of 57,000 pills, including counterfeit Cialis and Viagra. The total manufacturer suggested retail price of the drugs amounted to more than $925,000. So far, 53 countries have reported their results from Pangea 4. More than 13,400 websites engaged in illegal activity have been taken down. Regulators and custom officials inspected more than 45,000 packages. Authorities seized close to 8,000 packages containing more than 2.4 million illicit and counterfeit pills originating from 48 countries. I mean, all of this just drives home and reinforces the fact of what a global threat this is. These included, by the way, these seizures, antidepressants, antibiotics, steroids, arthritis medicine, lifestyle drugs, and diet pills. The total value of the seized pharmaceuticals is estimated to be worth more than $6.3 million. During the operation, 55 individuals were arrested and are under investigation for a range of offenses, including illegally selling and supplying unlicensed or prescription-only medicines. The impressive results of Pangea and other epic sweeps show what can be achieved globally when we take a united, coordinated, and aggressive stance against those who participate in counterfeit pharmaceutical schemes. Let me just share with you a few specific cases that HSI has investigated. And these cases are just a sampling of the criminals we've investigated who are profiting by deceiving and endangering the public's health and well-being through trafficking in fake pharmaceuticals. So in January of 2010, HSI special agents in Houston, working with the FDA and the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, began investigating N. Wang for illegally importing and distributing counterfeit drugs. This investigation was initiated after CBP had seized packages containing 7,000 counterfeit Viagra pills at the San Francisco International Mail Facility. HSI agents conducted what's called a controlled delivery, where we deliver the drugs to the bad guys so that we can try to identify the co-conspirators on the other end. So in this case, these drugs were delivered to Wang's residence, and we executed a search warrant, and we arrested Wang. During his 4-day trial, a Pfizer Pharmaceuticals chemist testified that the counterfeit Viagra pills CBP seized contained sheetrock. In March of 2011, Wang was sentenced to 33 months in federal prison and 2 years supervised release. Unfortunately, he fled, and he's now a fugitive. HSI agents in St. Louis and the FDA initiated another case after CBP seized a package from China containing 1,000 units. The package had been intercepted in December of 2009 during a 6-day IPR Center coordinated operation called Holiday Hoax. In Holiday Hoax, we seized counterfeit Christmas ornaments, toys, clothing, footwear, electronics, and pharmaceuticals. and holiday hoax brought subject Mark Hughes to our attention. Agents from HSI and FDA investigated Hughes for smuggling counterfeit pharmaceuticals, including Cialis and Viagra. Hughes was indicted in the Eastern District of Missouri on several charges, including smuggling, mail fraud, and introduction or delivery into U.S. commerce of adulterated or misbranded drugs. Authorities arrested Hughes in August of 2010, and he was subsequently sentenced to 46 months in federal prison. In another case, initiated by the HSI office in St. Louis, HSI and the FDA investigated two subjects, Manuel Cavello and Jeffrey Westmoreland, for trafficking in counterfeit pharmaceuticals through the internet. Subjects had been accepting orders for prescription drugs via their websites and shipping misbranded and counterfeit drugs to customers both in and outside of the United States. They used a Philippines-based customer service company to aid them in their scheme and paid them by Western Union. The buyers paid for the drugs they purchased over the internet via credit card processors based in the Netherlands. In December of 2008, the subjects were indicted on 6 federal charges in the U.S. District of Kansas related to counterfeit drug trafficking. A month later, 5 more charges were brought against them, including money laundering, smuggling, and dispensing a drug without the prescription of a practitioner licensed by law to administer the drug. Costa Rican authorities arrested Cavello in Costa Rica, and he was extradited to the United States. He pled guilty last January, was sentenced to 48 months in federal prison, and ordered to forfeit approximately $850,000. Westmoreland remains a fugitive. And this can often be a challenge, particularly with these transnational cases, in terms of trying to get our hands on folks. We sometimes do lure operations, try to engage them in undercover operations to meet them at places where we can ultimately bring them back to the U.S. to face justice. Now, I could cite many more such investigations, but I think this is enough to just give you a gist of how these criminals operate. So in closing, I want to say that even though counterfeit prescription drugs they are cause for great concern, it's quite encouraging that so many thoughtful, committed, and dedicated individuals and groups are coming together to fight this battle. At the beginning of my talk, I mentioned how one woman, Dr. Kelsey, stood firm so many years ago and saved American children from being born with severe birth defects. And Dr. Kelsey was at the FDA during the baby boom years when new births skyrocketed following World War II. So, we can sit back and we can think about how many people, even at our conference today, even here today in this room, siblings, classmates, friends who were born between the years of 46 and 64 may have had a different fate if the FDA had acted less responsibly. Or for the younger folks that are in the room, perhaps you may not have been born at all had this fate befallen one of your parents. So if one individual, can touch so many lives in such an amazing way and make such a positive impact in protecting the health and well-being of so many, think of the power and the difference that we can make by collectively approaching, by unifying, synchronizing our efforts, and approaching this counterfeit prescription drug issue with an aggressive and a morally responsible approach and perspective. So I look forward to continuing to work with all of you to keep our great nation safe and strong. Thank you.